What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel, and today I'll be showing you how to implement authorization and authentication into your applications, particularly your console applications, CLI applications, as well as your desktop applications and just normal mobile apps. So today we're going to be doing this example in C#, but this works almost the same for any language out there. So I've made a simple web API in C# that does operations on a simple movies database. So the database has one table. We just have a movies table. Here we have a movies model with a ID, name, director, description, runtime, and genre. Then we have a movie service that does operations on the database. So we have a get movies async, get movies by ID, update, create, and delete. And then we have a simple movies controller that implements the movie iMovie service interface. Here, for example, on the GET request, it gets all of the movies by implementing the iMovie service and then calling the correct get movies async function and then returning that function. So that is the simple application for the API. Let me just show you real quick that it works. So even though I do have Swagger installed or set up, I am going to be making use of Postman today for all of the applications. All of the requests. So here, just a simple get request, localhost, and the endpoint. Sending this, and then here you can get all of your movies in the database. Now we need to implement authentication into the application, into this web application, so that anybody that wants to call this endpoint needs to be authorized. They need to have a valid access token, because if you don't have that, then once this API is hosted, then anybody can just access your endpoints and just overflood your API. So going back to the web API application to implement authentication into our application, we're going to go back to the Solution Explorer and then go to program.cs. So now up here in the file at services, or let's go down here below where we add the iMovie interface service, we're going to say builder.services.add authentication. I'm first going to write out all of the code, then I'm going to explain everything. So here we add some options. Default authentication scheme. And then we need to install a package. So if you go over here to Solutions Explorer, and then you right-click on your application, Manage NuGet Packages, you could just go up here where it says Search, and then type in JWT. And then we're going to want to download this JWT bearer package. So just install that. Say apply, I accept. So it's finished downloading. Now you can go back to the program.cs. Alright, so after you've installed the package, make sure that this using on top ASP.NET Core Authentication.jwt bearer is in your imports. And then we're going to go down here and we can say JWT bearer default dot authentication scheme. So we're using the JWT bearer default authentication scheme, the JWT authentication scheme. And then we want to go and say options again, and default challenge scheme is also the JWT bearer default authentication scheme. Then we're going to say add JWT bearer, and then options. Let me just indent this so that it's easier to read. We can do something like that. Now we're going to add some more options. So this is going to be our auth domain. And then options. I'll explain all of this right now. And then audience. This is going to be what is currently using. So the difference is authority is the authentication scheme authority. So that's what we're getting the JWT token from. That's what's going to generate the JWT token. And then audience is what's going to use the access token. So in our case, it would be just Swagger. So let me just run this application. Let me just say yes, because it doesn't really matter. I just want to get the URL for Swagger. You can exit that again. Say /API. This would be whatever your API URL is, your hosted one, that's going to be using the token. So we're going to be adding some more options. Options.events. So we just want to add some more. We just want to add some more code, debugging code, just to see if the authentication fails. Why did it fail? All right, so this is completed, but then this auth domain, we need to actually have an auth domain. So let's just go to auth0.com and then let us log in. On the getting started page, I'm just going to create a new application. I'm just going to say native. So let's just create the app. So we're going to do my app, and then we're going to do my auth console app. And then we're just going to create the application. So after your application has been created, you'll see all of these tabs over here and your client ID here that we're going to be using to make requests. But to get the domain, you go into settings, and then here all of your basic information here as well as your client ID, your domain, and your client secret. So we're just going to copy the domain right over here. We're going to go back to our program.cs file, and then we're going to go and say https / and then paste the domain. We're just going to save, and then we're going to go back to the movies controller and add the authorized annotation to our API endpoint. So this is just for now, just the get all movies endpoint. So this is to actually add the authorization to the endpoint. So what we're doing is we're adding this authorization method to that endpoint, the JWT bearer authorization method to that endpoint. So if we run the program again, we go to Postman, and we try to send the same request, it'll say 401 not authorized. So we've successfully added the authentication to our application. All right, before we continue any further, I want to get some terminology out of the way. So authorization and authentication are two terms that sound a lot the same, almost they both start with auth. But what is the difference between authentication and authorization? Is there actually a difference? Well, there is one, and it's actually quite important to know the difference between them. So authentication is the process of verifying the identity of a user, a system, or anything trying to access a resource. So it ensures that the entity is who they claim to be it is. So is the person who they say they are? That's basically what it comes down to. And then authorization, on the other end, is the process of determining what actions or resources the authenticated person is allowed to access or allowed to do. So yeah, basically authentication confirms your identity, who you are, while authorization determines what you can do with your identity that is confirmed, so what you're allowed to do. And then, what actually is a JWT bearer? So I told you that we're going to be making use of the JWT authentication scheme. JWT stands for JSON Web Token, which is a compact, self-sustained means of transporting information using a JSON object. And this information inside of the JSON object can be trusted because it's digitally signed using a private key or a public key and some sort of hashing algorithm. And then lastly, what is the difference between Auth0 and OAuth? Because a lot of people get confused about those two terms as well. What are they? Are they the same thing? So not quite. Auth0 is an open standard for access delegation. It's commonly used as a third-party application on other websites, but without giving them the passwords. So OAuth allows users to grant third-party applications limited access to their resources without sharing their credentials. So basically what we're going to be doing is implementing authentication using basically any other third-party application. So if I'm on the Auth0 website right now, and if I go to authentication and go to social, you can see all of these socials right here. So that basically that's what it's doing. It's using GitHub, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, all of these third parties. It's allowing us as a website to use their information as a third party without sharing the passwords. So we're using Google and GitHub as authentication methods. And then on the other hand, the website that I'm on, Auth0, is a platform that provides authentication and authorization as a service. It helps developers implement authentication and authorization features, like the social connections and third-party connections. So going back to our application, if you want to go back to the application, it's just here in the Applications tab, Application, and then search for the application name. We can go back to Quick Start, and then now we're going to select the SDK that we're going to do the authentication with. So we're going to do device authentication flow. So that basically means we're going to be using a device to authenticate the user with some sort of device access code. So let's just go through the process again, what we're going to try to do. We need an access code to access this endpoint. How do we get one? And we also need some information because we want to authenticate the user and see that they are who they say they are. But we're going to do that with an access code. So we're first going to try to get the access code. We're going to go back to our web application. This is to the Solution Explorer, and we're going to create a new controller. I'm going to go to API, just an empty controller. We're going to call it login controller. All right. So if you guys can remember, I told you that the audience in this options.audience, where we add the JWT bearer, is what is going to be using the JWT bearer token. So in this case, we want the JWT bearer for authenticating our API. So the API is going to be using that token. That's where we're implementing the authorization. So that's why we have it set as the audience. So our program knows that, but Auth0 doesn't know that yet. So if we go back to getting started here, the Auth0, I'm just on the home page now. So if we go on the drop down to applications, we go to APIs. So this is obviously an API that we want to connect. So we just create a new API. So we want auth console demo. And then this is the identifier. So this would be the same as this. And then this is the sign-in algorithm you're using. Let's just create this one. And here in the quick start, you can already tell if we go to the C# one, This is very similar to what we already added to program.cx. Coming back to our application, if we go back to the device authorization, here is just some prerequisites that we need. So we need to make sure that the device code is selected as the grant type. So let's just make sure of that. So let's go back to settings, and then advanced settings, and then grant type. So make sure that the device code is selected. And then we can go back to quick start, the device. And then here is how you can create your post request. So I'm going to copy this. We're going to create a simple HTTP post request. We're going to give it the URL of get device code. I'm going to make it public. Async. It returns a task of I action result. And then this is the name. Oops, sorry. And then this would be the same. So it would be get device code. And then here we would paste what's inside of what we got from here. So here there's probably just some packages we need to install. So we can say install REST shard package. So we can just say find and install. So that's installing that for us. And then this is just a wrong way to create the post method. So we're going to take this out for now. And then we are going to say method is equal to method dot post. And then we just need to import this as well using REST-sharp.post. I just think that's like that, and semicolon goes here. Then we're going to change this to just var. Because this is an async function, we're going to say execute async, and we're going to await over here. Then we're going to manually insert all of these parameters. So first, the client ID that we get from the settings. Let me just open a new tab, or rather, let me just copy this here. So this is the client ID. You can also get it over here. Let's go over here all the way to where it says scope. Paste that in. Now scope is what you want the application to return, or what you want the access token of the payload of the access token, what you want that payload to include. So here you can see the scopes for which you want to request authorization. So we want the profile, the email, and the open ID must be separated by a space. So we can take this part out and say open ID. We can say email. We can say profile separated by a space. And then the last one is audience. So we already know that from the API, our audience is the same. So we can go here and we just copy that one. That's the API that we just created. And we can paste that in the audience. All right, so we need to actually return something. So we can say return and then OK and the response. So let's save that and let's go to Postman, where you can create a request for this endpoint. So we can say get device code, and then we can add a body. Let's make it URL encoded data. So we can just copy these parameters again. So it's a client underscore ID, audience, and the last one was scope. So I'm going to copy these, they should be just the same. And then let's send the request. All right, so this is the response of the request. So if we go all the way down, might have missed it. Oh, here it is. So if we go all the way down, we can see the content. This is the device code, this is the user code, verification URI, and then the expires, the interval, and the verification URI complete. So now let's just make this a bit more readable. So let's do response.content. So this is actually what we're getting. So here you can see the device code, the user code, and the verification URI. All right, so now that we've successfully gotten the device code and the verification URI, it's time to get the access code with this device code. So going back to the application getting started, if I scroll down, we can see the request token and the example of the post request for the request token. So if we go to the C# part again, we can just copy this one again. We can create another API request called HTTP post again. We can call this one get access token. This will also be a public async, turns a task, and an I action result. Get access token. And then we can paste it. We can basically just copy what we have in this one and then paste it over here. So it's just basically the request parameter that's going to change. So to get the parameters for this post request, we can go back to the getting started page where it will show us what parameters this request is expecting. So it's expecting a grant type, a device code, and a client ID. So the grant type is given to us. We can use this one right here, the device code. Then we can just paste it into here. The client ID is the application ID. So we can just copy this one from the previous one step. And the device code is the code that we just got from this endpoint. Before we do that, let's just change this response again. We need to add the return type. So we're going to use a J object, and then request body as a parameter. So let's just get the device code from the request body. So we can do string device code is equal to, let's parse it as a string, and then request body, and then device code. And then we're going to take that, and then we can put it over here. All right. And then let's just add some validation and get the response in a nicely formatted manner. And now let's test everything. So we're going to need to create another HTTP post request. So instead of get device code, we can say get access token here, and then we're going to specify body, raw, and JSON. Then device code. Now we need to make sure that this device code is spelled exactly the same as the device code we have over here. So you can just basically copy and paste this one. So just make sure that it's the exact same spelling, otherwise it won't work. So we're going to run the program, and then we're going to send a request here to get a fresh device code. We're going to take this device code, copy it, and then we're going to paste it here and then send the request. Alright guys, so I was getting this error before. The JSON value could not be converted to newsoft.json.linkUJT token. So to solve that error, I went to the package manager and I installed this Newtonsoft JSON package. And then in the program.cs, I also just added this line of code where you add Newtonsoft JSON. Also, just before I forget, I just saw this, so there should not be the device code, there should be a token. Device code is the one we used in the previous one to get the device code, but we're now doing getting the access token. All right, and let's just go back to our Postman real quick, and let's get a new device code. So with this device code, we can enter that here and try to get a access token. So it'll say authorization pending, which is a good thing because we haven't authorized yet. So then we can go back to here and we can click on this verification URI complete. We can use this link. So this one is the same as this one, except the user code is already in the header, so you don't have to manually enter that. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm just going to open a new incognito window just to show you everything because my user data would probably be saved already. So here is the device confirmation. Here you can see the user code is already entered there, so I can just confirm it. Then it'll show me all of these options with which one do I want to continue with. So I can say continue with GitHub. So here I've entered my GitHub username and password. Then I can say sign in. And it says congratulations, you're all set now. Then if you go back to Postman and you try to get the access token again from the same device code, after we've authorized, here we have the device code. Let's just go back to the GET request. You guys remember that that we're not authorized to make this request. So we can go into headers. Let's just minimize this one. We can now add authorization and then bearer as the value, and then paste the code and then send it. And now we're authorized. So now all of the endpoints that are authorized you can access using this code. So the last thing that I wanted to show you guys is how to actually get the user information from that access token that we just got. So let's make our final API endpoint. So it would be another HTTP post, which we can name user details. It'll be a public function as well as async and alternate task with an I action result, just like the previous functions. we can call it get user details. And this one would also accept the J object with a request body. The request body will only consist of the access token. So let's do that. And then we can do string access token is equal to string request body, and let's just call it token. So again, these would still be the same up until here. Token. And then instead of token, here you can also see they grant you the user details for the user info, so you can just replace this one, user info. Alright, and then we need to add a request, just another header. We don't need to add a request body. We can add a header, just the same one. We say authorization, and we can say bearer, and then we can say access token. And then we can make it just autocomplete that, execute the response, and then we can say return okay, and we can say response dot content. We can save that, run the program, then let's just create a new request here, final one, so we can make it a post request. Instead of access token, we say user details, and in the body we can say JSON, and then just say token, and then copy the token that we just got from the previous response, and then we've copied the token that we just got from the previous response, and then we can hit send, and here is all of the details. So that's it, you guys. I showed you how to get an access token. I showed you how to protect your API and verify it, and verify your endpoints by getting an access token and implement Auth0.